Amen. So, God's promises, he's faithful to them. He carries them out. He fulfills them. Now, I'm not always that good. I don't always fulfill those promises the way that God does. And when all this started with COVID, I made a commitment to wait until the isolation was done, until kind of things went back to normal, to cut my hair. I jumped the gun. I'm sorry. I just couldn't deal with it any longer. As you know, it got very, very long. And talking with a friend of mine, she thought that it would be a really great idea if I styled it in the style of a mohawk. So for her birthday, I went ahead and attempted to do that with my long hair. Just put it up. I mean, I didn't shave the sides or whatever, but I went for the mohawk and sent it to her on her birthday. And then I thought to myself, okay, if I've got the hairstyle down, like, what's the look? Like, what clothes do I have that can really complete the mohawk look? And so this was my best attempt at the look. I don't know if it works, but, I thought, hey, I'm going to go for a kind of cooler, hipper, younger vibe, and maybe that will help me finally get that girlfriend that I've been waiting for so long. So, just so you know, a year ago, last summer, I made a Match.com dating profile. Because I have good seasons and I have bad seasons. There are days when I'm just like, I'm good, I'm content, I'm happy, I don't need this. Kristen did a great job talking about that and being in that place, not needing that other person. But sometimes I'm in a place where I'm just like, I am needing this right now. I'm kind of tired of being lonely. And so I made this profile, and because it's hard to find that person. It's hard to find that match. Now, as we begin to discover the story of Isaac and Rebekah this morning, it actually begins with the story of Abraham, if we're going to get the full picture of Isaac and Rebekah, and it begins with him wanting to find a match for his son, Isaac. So it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Abraham is wanting to be faithful to the promise that God has made him. And the way that the story ends up, as Isaac and Rebekah first meet, it's like something out of a fairy tale. It's a movie, storybook type ending. It's just beautiful. So Abraham calls his servant in. This is in Genesis chapter 24. We're going to be in 24, touching on points all the way through the beginning of 28. Not going to read all of it to you. You're welcome. But we're going to just kind of zoom in on pieces of the story. But you can follow along in Genesis 24 through the very beginning of 28. So Abraham brings in his servant and says, hey, I want you to go and find a wife for my son Isaac, but don't go amongst the people that we're in right now in Canaan. I want you to go back to my own country and to my own people to find the wife for me. Because, again, he's aware of God's call in his life, that he's called him away from his homeland. And he said, I'm going to bless all nations through you, and your descendants are going to inherit this land. They're going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And so Abraham's aware of this call away from home, and he's living into that promise. It's uncomfortable and it's hard. What comfort has God called you away from right now? And how are you living into his promises? Well, the servant, they have this conversation. The servant's like, what if, she doesn't come with me? Am I supposed to take Isaac back there? And Abraham says, no, like the call is out of the land. So if she doesn't go with you, then that's not on you anymore. You're released from this oath. And so the servant gathers 10 camels and just a caravan, and he sets off on his journey. And he comes to this town. And I love what happens when he arrives at this town. It says in verse 12 through 14, this is the first recorded prayer for guidance found in the Bible. And this is what it says. This is the servant talking. Then he prayed, Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. What I love about this is that the servant is completely dependent upon God, for God's provision, for God's providence, for God's fulfillment of his word to bless this journey, which means that for us, in all that we do, we must depend upon God. Everything. When we wake up, when we go to work, as we sit down around the dinner table, as we hang out with friends, we must be willing to depend upon God, upon his faithfulness, upon his promises. Now, in this prayer, the servant uses the word for kindness twice. It's a special Hebrew word. It's the word chesed. And it's a very special word. And the picture is kind of telling the story, the picture of an inferior partner who is completely dependent upon a superior partner for everything. That is the picture that we have with God. That we don't have, God does have. That God is sufficient, that he is all-powerful, and we are completely dependent upon his kindness in our lives for everything that we do. In my life, that's looked like a lot of different things. I want to share with you just a few of the ways that God's loving kindness, his chesed, has been played out in my life. So I was the youngest of 3 boys. I've told this story before. I loved it. I loved just being the youngest, and I could just get away with a lot more than my older brothers. And it was just such a delight to be the youngest. But then when I was 9, my family decided to bring in a little girl into our family and adopt her. And for me, honestly, it was really hard. I went to counseling for this. The family dynamic has shifted. There's this new person. She's supposed to be my sister. What does this look like? She's a stranger to me. How am I going to do this? It was hard. But in the midst of that, God's kindness says, but Ben, now you get to be a big brother. And you get to care for her and love on her. And you get to be for her what your brothers were for you. My uncle's suicide when I was a teen. It's hard. And the devastation of that, God's kindness has prepared me then to walk alongside others who are going through struggles with their mental health. I have no kids of my own, yet I'm an uncle to 6 incredible nieces and nephews. And in my time in youth ministry, I've gotten to pour into hundreds of students in ways that I likely wouldn't have been able to if I had kids of my own. I flunked out of college, and yet here I am today getting to do the thing that I love and that maybe I'm good at. And I get to wake up each day with God's breath in my lungs, carrying his love and his purposes in my heart. This is God's kindness that I am completely dependent upon. So as the story unfolds, the servant has prayed this prayer. And sure enough, Rebekah comes out. But I love in his prayer that it's not just beauty that he's looking for. He's actually looking for hospitality. That's the desired trait. He's looking for something that's deeper than the surface, which I think means that for all of us, we are more than the sum of our parts. That I don't necessarily need to adopt a new look physically. I need to care about my character. What's going on inside? Am I hospitable? Am I patient? Am I kind? Do I care for others? That is the more important thing to be looking for. And so this is what the servant is focusing on. And Rebekah comes out, and it unfolds exactly as he's prayed. He asks for the drink of water, and she says, "Here, and let me also water your camels. Now, understand about this gesture on Rebekah's part. As she's offering now to do this, he's got 10 camels with him, and each camel could drink up to 25 gallons, which means that she is offering to go and fetch 250 gallons of water for his camels. That's 2,000 pounds, literally carrying a ton. Also, to give you perspective, that would be equal to 6 bathtubs or 1 1/3 hot tubs of water that she is offering to go and get. And so she does, and she feeds until his camels are done. And I love what the servant does, what the story tells, is that he doesn't just all of a sudden go, that's it, the prayer's been answered, let's go, this is it. He continues to depend upon God. He sits back and he waits, not jumping to any hasty conclusions. But instead, when Rebekah actually now extends, we have a place for you to stay as well, that's the moment that he goes, okay, this is of God. That she's from Abraham's people, that she's hospitable, that she's served me above and beyond what I've needed. And so he stops and he worships. And again, as he worships, he's reflecting on God's chesed, his kindness, on granting success to this journey. And so the entire encounter that he has with Rebekah is framed in worship and in prayer, in communication with the Lord. We need to frame our days in communication with God. To start the day with it and to end the day, depending upon Him for all that we do, for all that we endeavor to accomplish, for the goodness of our purposes in life, for what we are tasked with, for the way that we love our families. Now, as the story unfolds, he actually gives her a few gifts, and they go back to her family, and he unpacks the entire story for her family. Everything that we just kind of went through, he unpacks for the family, and the family's like, wow, this is incredible, this is of God. Yes, Rebekah, she will go with you and become Isaac's wife. He stays the night. And in the morning, the family actually says, well, hey, you know what? Before you head out, maybe just wait 10 days or so. And the servant says, no, send us on our way now. See, the family was actually trying to be a little bit greedy and swindle him out of the gifts that he had already given them, and also then to keep Rebekah with him, because if they waited, then they weren't going to send Rebekah. And so they actually say, well, let's ask Rebekah if she's willing to go. Now, they've already said she's going to go, but now they're going, okay, let's see if she wants to, because if she says no, now they can hold to their word. So, Rebekah, what do you want to do? And she says, I will go. And already she's seeing, I believe, the providence of God in this situation, and she's trusting this, and she's trusting this is of Him. And she displays great faith in her willingness to go. Now, as we find out, as they make their way back and when they arrive, this takes about 3 years, actually, from when the servant leaves to when the servant comes back. And this is the storybook part, okay? Because Isaac, he's out for a walk one day, maybe meditating in the field or something, and he looks up. And there, across the way, he sees the caravan. He sees Rebekah. And right at that time, Rebekah looks up, and she sees Isaac. And it's just like, music. I mean, it's just this beautiful moment, right? When you just know happily ever after, they get married, and it's wonderful. The storybook, fairy tale beginning to their life together. But as we read through the story, we see it quickly becomes a struggle. In the next chapter, in Genesis 25, it tells us that Rebekah has not been able to have kids. And as, again, Kristen pointed out last week, this was an incredibly hard thing for women. This was not good. And so Isaac prays, God, bless us. Give us this pregnancy. Let us have children. And he actually prays for 20 years for this to happen. Eventually, Rebekah does become pregnant. And in her pregnancy, she feels something go wrong. In chapter 25, verse 22, it says this: "The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, 'Why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord." Now, the word jostled here can mean to crush. So she's experiencing in her womb that her twin boys now, they're fighting, there's crushing. This does not feel right. This does not feel good. And her first response is, why? Why is this happening? She just reacts authentically. We need to be able to react authentically when things happen. Why is this happening? What's going on? What's the purpose of this? We need to be able to ask those questions and just sit in that place. But an authentic reaction will come up short if it does not drive us to God. And so she goes and she inquires of the Lord. She's reacted. Just that first initial, why? Okay, but let me go to God now. And God responds in verse 23. It reads, "The Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.'" Now, the fact that God says the older will serve the younger, this is countercultural. This is not the way things work in their world, right? That the oldest is the heir, is the one who's going to lead the family. And God says, no, actually, the older is going to serve the younger. God does not work in the ways that the world does. So we cannot be surprised when God operates differently than the world works. It's going to look different. And you know what? His ways are better. As we continue to see this story of Isaac and Rebekah, we need to actually take a closer look at Jacob and Esau, because it's going to impact how we see Isaac and Rebekah as a couple, as parents of their kids. And so we read a little bit further on in verse 27, that the boys grow up. It says, now Esau was born first, and Jacob was born second, twin boys, and Jacob was like grasping the heel of his brother as he came out. So they were close, but Esau older, Jacob younger. It says the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Now Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is this birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Now, it says that Esau was a hunter. Went out into the open country, in the fields, bow and arrow probably, and he was a hunter. Now, I grew up in Indiana, and there were a lot of people who were hunters. My best friend's dad was actually a state champion in archery, and he would go and bow and arrow hunt. And so I was curious, what are the things that Jacob would have, or Esau would have hunted back in those days? And so I did some research, and it might have been like a gazelle. Might have been something in those places that he would have hunted. There were a lot of other things, but the gazelle maybe was the most common thing that we would recognize that he might hunt. But then I was curious, I'm in Washington now, what is there to even hunt around here? There's deer and elk, but did you know that we have moose in Washington? Northeastern Washington. And so, if the story's unfolding here, maybe this is what Jacob would, or Esau would have hunted. Either way, he's a hunter, and he goes out, and his dad loves the fact that he's bringing home the wild game, the red meat for him. But Jacob, it says, he loves to stay at home, just in the tents, with his mother, just, chilling, making meals and whatnot. And Jacob and Esau are favorited by their parents. Right? And from what I've heard, like, you don't divide your love, you're supposed to multiply it. And yet, Isaac and Rebekah have picked their favorites. Now, his favorite is based on his natural senses. As we see the story unfold, it tells us that Isaac is likely beginning to lose his sight and really enjoying just the taste of his mouth, and that he grows old and he grows fat, just loving what Esau is bringing him. But for Rebekah, she loves Jacob. Now, it could just be that she just picks a favorite. She just likes Jacob. He stays around more often. But it could also be that she hasn't forgotten God's word, that, the older is going to serve the younger. And so she cherishes Jacob. So the parents are split. They're divided here. And then we see that Jacob and Esau themselves are divided. Jacob weasels Esau out of his birthright, which didn't mean very much to Esau. Now, the birthright was the double portion of the inheritance, okay? So what that means that if a father had 9 sons, then the firstborn would receive 2 of those portions, 2 of those 9 allotted portions, and the other 8 would have to split the 7 remaining portions. So if there are just 2 sons, the first son gets both, and the second son gets neither. But it also means the birthright is, this is going to be the person who's going to lead the family, who's going to carry on this family name from generation to generation. He's going to lead, he's going to protect the family. But also in this situation, it means that the oldest is going to inherit the Abrahamic covenant, that he's supposed to carry on this promise that God has made, and the trusting of it and the living out of this promise. So the fact that Esau just despises it and sells it says that maybe he doesn't really care about that covenant. And later we see that as he grows older, he marries women from the land. He marries some Hittite women, which is something that greatly displeases his family. And of course, as we remember the story, right, Abraham went to very great lengths not to do that very thing, to find a wife from among his own people, from his own country. And here Esau is just saying, I'm just going to marry here. Because Abraham was trusting God's promise. Okay, you've called me out, and we're going to inherit this land, but not by participating and partnering with the polytheistic pagan culture around us. And so Isaac favoring Esau becomes very, very problematic in the story. And by the time Isaac is old, we read about this in chapter 27 of Genesis. At this point, the division in the family is nearly palpable. This is recorded in the chapter through 7 encounters between these 4 individuals, and none of these encounters see Jacob and Esau interact, and only one in which Isaac and Rebekah interact. If you want family conflict, don't talk to each other. As the story unfolds, Isaac, he's become old, he doesn't see very well, and he calls Esau in. He says, Esau, I want you to go and I want you to hunt. And I want you to bring back some of the food that I love, and you're going to make me a meal, and then I'm going to give you the blessing. Now, Rebekah is listening in on this conversation. And she goes to Jacob and she says, your father just told this to Esau, and so we're gonna take it for you. So Jacob, I want you to go and get me a couple of cattle, and we're gonna kill them, and I'm gonna make something that your father loves, and you're gonna put on like some hairy goat skins on your arms and neck because your brother's hairy, and we're gonna fool your father. And she dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes, and this is all to deceive Isaac. And Jacob, he's on board with the plan. He's just worried about getting caught. And so they do this. So she prepares the meal. Jacob takes it into his father, dressed in Esau's clothes with these hairy skins on him. And he says, "Here, Father, here's the food that you asked me to make." And Isaac hears the voice. He's like, are you really Esau? And Jacob's like, yes, I am. And Isaac's not convinced. And so he has him come closer, and he touches him, and he smells the clothes. And finally, he's convinced that it is Esau. And so he gives his blessing to Jacob. Jacob leaves, and almost immediately Esau comes in, brings in the food, and goes, "Father, here you go." And Isaac is like, "Wait, what? Like, who was that then that was just in here?" And he realizes that he's been duped. And Esau realizes that for the second time, Jacob has swindled him out of something that belonged to him. And so Esau cries out, "Dad, don't you have anything for me? Like, isn't there anything left? Bless me too, Dad." And Isaac's just like, I can't. And Esau becomes just incensed. He's enraged at Jacob. He wants to kill him. Unfortunately, Rebekah finds out about this and sends Jacob away to save his life. Now, what we see happening here, when Isaac first brings Esau in and tells him, "I want you to go do this because I'm going to give you the blessing," he's doing in secret what should have been a public thing. Keeping confidence builds trust, but keeping secrets destroys it. So Isaac, he does not see that giving the blessing to Esau is not advancing the covenant, is not trusting God's promise. He's physically not able to see, but also it's mirrored by his heart. Spiritually, he cannot see what's going on. But maybe Rebekah does. The kindest interpretation of Rebekah would say that maybe she's wrestling with this, that she's wrestling with, God said that Jacob, it's going to be him who's going to be served, that he's kind of supposed to be the one to move forward. So when she married into the family, she would have learned of this covenant. She would have learned of this dynamic and of who Yahweh actually is. And so is she wrestling with this idea of how do we carry this on? How do we live faithfully to this promise from God? It's a fragile idea. It's a new idea. And she's having to choose, maybe, between her two sons. Which would mean that while her values are sound, her methods are not. So she convinces Jacob, and they fool Isaac, and the blessing goes to Jacob. Like I said, Esau is devastated, and he's angry. And all of a sudden, what started off as this beautiful story begins to mirror that of Cain and Abel. But Rebekah tells Jacob, "Your brother wants to kill you. You need to leave." And then she goes to Isaac and she says, "I can't bear the thought of Jacob marrying anybody from around here, so send him back to our family, send him back to our people." And Isaac agrees. And in Genesis 28, it says this, the first 4 verses. So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father, Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there from among the daughters of the nations, from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your number until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." What we see here is that maybe Isaac begins to see again. He's been deceived. He's been duped by his son, giving out a false blessing. But in this instance, Isaac forgives Jacob and actually bestows upon him an even fuller blessing because he begins to see this is going to carry out the promise and the covenant of God. So after such a beautiful beginning, the story devolves into secrecy, deception, and rage. Yet I love this, that in the midst of that, in the midst of the deception and the picking of favorites and the rage and the secrets, that God's purposes are still accomplished. Which means that you do not have to get rid of family conflicts for God's purposes to be worked out. That God works in the cracks of our lives for His good, for His will, for His purposes. That He takes us, broken vessels, and He uses us. That we don't have to get it together before His will can be done, before He can work in our lives and through our lives. We shouldn't settle for conflict, but neither should we have to fix everything before we come to God. We should follow the example of Abraham's servant, and that is to communicate. That we need to talk to God. To not give up trusting Him and depending upon His goodness, upon His kindness in our lives. That we need to worship, that we need to pray, that we need to come before Him in the ways that are authentic for us, to talk with Him, to communicate with Him. We must frame our days in conversation with Him, and we also must remember to communicate with the people in our lives, with our families. Keep talking with your spouse. Keep talking with your kids. Kids, keep talking with your parents. Keep talking with your siblings, even when they make you so mad. Don't let secrets divide you. Now, if you're in the midst of conflict this morning, I want you to remember something. And if you're not in the midst of conflict, this can be for when you're thrown into it, because all of us will face conflict. I want you to remember that God's loving kindness is built on a covenant. And that covenant is what held this family and God's purposes together. That's the story. That's God's story. That's our story. That God has made a covenant with us through His Son Jesus, who died so that we might inherit the promise. And God is faithful to His promise, to His covenant. May we ever depend upon the loving kindness of our good Father.